The second part of this lecture, I want to look more specifically at how logical our reasoning is. The English psychologist Peter Wason wanted to explore the possibility that learning in ordinary life is really science in embryo. The formation of hypotheses and the search for evidence to contradict them. Popper's famous work on falsification. It's all conjectures and refutations, all of these conjectures leading to new conjectures. And this Wason selection task, this experimental paradigm that I will show to you in a minute, this paradigm, this method of research has dominated the field of research into human logical reasoning since the 60s of the previous century. So ever since, people around the world that are interested in logical reasoning have exploited this Wason paradigm that is actually based on Popper-style reasoning to look at how people reason in particular situations, whether they follow the rules of logic or not. And specifically, it has looked at the violation of a conditional hypothesis of the form if P then Q. So this type of research has looked at how people reason about regularities, about rules of the form if P then Q. For example, if it rains, then I will become wet. That's the type of regularity, the type of logical rule that they've looked at. Here's the Wason selection task. People are presented with 4 cards on a table, and on these cards that are printed on 2 sides, there's one light blue side with a number on it, here, and there's a purple side or dark blue side with a letter on it. So that's the basic setup. You sit in the lab, and on the table in front of you, there are 4 cards. And the question you're asked, your task is to test the following rule. Cards with an even number on one side have a vowel on the other side. So cards with an even number have a vowel on the other side. If a card has an even number on one side, to complete the rule, then it has a vowel on the other side. What card or cards would you turn over to check whether this rule is true? So if you were asked to test the rule, if a card has an even number, then it has a vowel on the other side, which of these cards would you turn over? And you can turn over 1, 2, 3, or 4. Which of them would you turn over to test the rule? I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it. Just think about what cards you would turn over to check whether the rule is true. I'll go back to the rule. That's probably easier. You have the rule there too. Who of you would turn over that card? All of you. Who of you would turn over that card? Not many people, but some in the back. And how many people would turn over that card? None. And how many people would turn over the E card? Again, a couple of raised arms, but not as many as in the first case. So, some people turn over at least 3 of these cards. The E card's turned over, the 5 card, and the 8 card. There were no takers for the K card in this case. Wouldn't that be informative? Let's have a closer look at the reasoning that you use in turning over a particular card. The 8 card, the card that everyone chose, follows the rules of reason, follows a logical way of reasoning. That's also referred to as modus ponens. If P then Q and P then Q. So you have a rule, you turn over the card with the condition, and you should find on the other side the vowel. And that's what you expect to find turning that card over. The other informative, logical way of picking a card is the card that no one picked, the K card. Because there you would be following another rule of logic, modus tollens. By picking the K card, you follow the following line of reasoning. The rule is, if P then Q, you turn over the not vowel card, and the consonant card, not Q, and if you turn that over, there can't be an even number on the other side. That's just logic. That is a valid way of testing this rule. Now have a look at the other 2 cards. Turning over the 5 card, so an odd number card, you follow a type of reasoning that is depicted here by this structure, which is known as the denial of the antecedents. And many people actually use this type of reasoning, even though it will tell you nothing about the validity of the rule. It's just simply not able to inform you about the validity of the rule if you turn over that card. That card can never tell you if the rule is true. Because if you turn over the 5 card, say that you find not Q on the other side, that still doesn't tell you whether the rule, cards with an even number have a vowel on the other side, is true or not. And no card that you find can tell you something about that particular rule. And I'll leave it for you to think about that, because the response of most people to this explanation is, that can't be right. Of course that tells you something. But I'm inviting you to take this away with you later on today and to think about it. This does not inform you in any way. Now, the final card, card number 4, the E card, also chosen by quite a few people. This is again a form of invalid reasoning. This card will not inform you about the rule. It follows the structure that is depicted here. You have the rule, if P then Q, you turn over the Q card, the consequence card, the vowel card, and you think that finding a P on the other side will tell you something about the rule. Again, this is simply not true. This is not a valid way of reasoning. And of course, you see this type of reasoning, this affirmation of the consequence, a lot in advertising. Statements like, real men do yoga, are an example of that. Or in Dutch, echte mannen roken caballero. actually tempting people to start smoking Caballero or doing yoga on the premise that that will make them a real man. But of course, it's the other way around. This type of invalid reasoning in an abstract task has been found time and again in hundreds and hundreds of studies over the last couple of decades. And time and again, in around 80% of the cases, subjects like you here today pick a card that does not allow them to test the rule. And then, of course, like in the case with Tversky and Kahneman, the question is, why? What is it that makes people pick that card? Why don't they reason logically? Is this a confirmation bias? Do we have a natural tendency to confirm things? Could be. That would be in line with what Tversky and Kahneman said. This Wisiati stuff where you just desperately try to build your knowledge as quick as you can. But again, there's a snag. Things are not as simple as they may seem in the first instance, because they also did this with a more concrete task, using more concrete examples. So they used cards with slightly more complicated stuff on them to test more realistic, concrete rules, like if you drink beer, then you must be over 21. So here we have two cards. Could be ID card, could be an ID card of someone, with an age on it. And you have two cards stating what that person is drinking. And now they ask you, hey, you're the bouncer in the bar. Can you check that rule for me? We have a mock setup of you working as a bouncer in the bar. Can you now test that rule by turning over cards? And lo and behold, if you change the task from an abstract task with letters and numbers to a concrete task with real persons that drink real stuff and have a real age, then all of a sudden 75% of subjects pick the right cards. So pick the modus ponens and the modus tollens cards, the logical cards, the cards that will allow them to test the rule. And now we have a real conundrum, a real riddle. How can it be that simply by going from an abstract task to a concrete task, the behavior changes completely? Early on, explanations for this difference were in line with the work of Tversky and Kahneman. They were talking about availability, familiarity, that we have more practice in reasoning about concrete things than we have in reasoning about abstract things, and that's why there's this difference. However, later on, two evolutionary psychologists, Tooby and Cosmides, came up with a different explanation. They said, no, what's at work here is some kind of ingrained evolutionary mechanism that helps us detect cheaters. So in one situation, in the situation with the concrete task, where you were asked to turn cards to check whether people were allowed to drink, a mechanism kicks in that is developed by mankind over the ages to deal with cheaters, because that is crucial for survival if you wish to cooperate with other people. So we have a strongly developed cheater detection mechanism, and this mechanism causes this effect. But then, of course, the question is, okay, show us the data. Yeah, you can come up with an explanation like that, but of course you will then also have to show experimentally that your explanation makes sense in terms of experimental data. And what they did is they tried to tease apart familiarity and cheating. So they came up with a rule that could be tested that was just as concrete. And the experiment was done in Boston, and they just asked inhabitants of Boston To test the rule, if you go to Boston, then you take the subway. Highly concrete, highly familiar. However, they also came up with a cheater detection condition, the cassava rule condition. And in that cassava rule condition, people first got a story, a description. A tribe called the Kaluame. And in this tribe, cassava root is a scarce and powerful aphrodisiac, something that makes you a better lover. Among the Kaluame, only married men have tattoos on their faces. The elders have established the cassava rule because they strongly disapprove of sexual relations between unmarried people, let alone that they enjoy it. That's what old people used to do, still do in some cases. However, many unmarried men, and we know them all, they're dogs, they're tempted to cheat. Now, the question is, if you're cued into the task as a kind of guard, so if you're cued into the perspective of someone who has to make sure that people follow that rule, obey the cassava rule, again, by turning over a card, you can ask people to test whether there are any cheaters here. Is there any case in the cards, and of course in this case where you're looking at cheating, you're not telling them that you're looking at cheating, you just ask them again, test the following rule, pick a card. And now you have three conditions. Yeah, you have an abstract condition, you have a familiar condition, the Boston transportation condition, and you have a cheater detection condition. And they even used the control cheater condition where they didn't tell them that they were the guard. So they were not cued into the perspective of having to see if someone was cheating. And what they found was indeed that this effect, this difference between concrete and abstract in the original study, seems to be driven mostly by something specific for looking at social contracts. So they may indeed be onto something, Tooby and Cosmides. Our decision making, our reasoning seems to be driven in this particular instance by our ability to detect cheaters. And that is very important for survival over the long run, if you wish to cooperate with other people. And as you can see, there is a bit of a familiarity effect here. So the Boston transportation rule shows a bigger tendency to respond correctly in the case of a concrete rule, but it certainly isn't the whole story, because the case where people are actually cued into the cheater detection mode is the case where you see most rational, logical responses. Okay, now for a brief finale. Another domain where rationality was held as the ideal, first and foremost by Immanuel Kant, the highlight of the Enlightenment, was the domain of moral reasoning, where Kant actually stated that there must be something like a universal rule, a categorical imperative on how one should behave in certain situations, how one should reason about morality. And a lot of research in psychology about how people develop moral reasoning has been done using scripts like this. In this script, we read about Heinz, whose wife is desperately ill. And Heinz is a poor guy, but of course he wants to cure his wife. And there's a pharmacist in town who has invented a new drug, a drug that can cure his wife. But he doesn't have enough money. And the question to you as a participant in a study like this is, after reading a story like this, is it okay for Heinz to go and steal those drugs, to save the life of his wife. There are several positions one could take, several stances, several opinions, but what the opinion is that you have doesn't really matter to the researcher in question. So it doesn't matter if you say, oh no, you shouldn't steal because stealing is bad, or whether you say, no, killing is bad. It doesn't, the frame of reference doesn't matter. What matters is the sophistication of your reasoning. So how many questions do you actually ask about the situation? At what level of complexity are you thinking about morality? That's what has driven most research. Now I would like you to read the following script and answer the question at the end. And I will read along with you and look at your faces while you read. Jennifer works in a medical school pathology lab as a research assistant. This lab prepares human cadavers that are used to teach medical students about anatomy. She's vegetarian. She's an idealist. She hates wasting food, especially when it's meaty food. See what she did. I can see it on your faces. I can read it on your faces. What your moral judgment is of Jennifer. Jennifer is bad. There's something very wrong with what she did. Faces of disgust abound. But why? Take that home with you. How rational are you? Or are you just a bloody pinball machine? Thank you for your attention.